Welcome to the Fully Mindful, where we explore what it means to live with intention, creativity, authenticity, and connection. I'm your host, Melissa Chareau, mindfulness and breathwork facilitator, neurodivergent lawyer and coach, and fellow human navigating this wild and beautiful ride we call life. On this podcast, we dive deep with interviews featuring inspiring guests, share solo mini episodes packed with guided mindfulness practices to help you center and thrive, and mix things up with tangents and sidebars, where my friend and fellow podcaster Debbie Harrell from the New World Normal joins me for some real, random, and meaningful conversations. So if you're ready to pause, reflect, and expand, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful.
My kids are really little, and they are the best reminders for me that our bodies intuitively, inherently know how to get regulated, whether that's spinning or, being upside down or, whistling or, they just do it. We just kind of lose that as we get older. So I'm always encouraging folks to think about just hold on to the idea of playfulness and where you can kind of tap into things that maybe brought joy at some point, but you've moved away from as you've gotten older.
Hey everybody, this is Melissa with the Fully Mindful. Have I got a fantastic conversation for you today with Dr. Jenny King, co-director at the Center on Trauma and Adversity and assistant professor at Case Western. Unbelievable conversation. And I have to get a little fangirl here because I've been stalking, I guess, Dr. Jenny King on Instagram, where she posts the most amazing work. It's not, these like pithy little things. It's real stuff that is really helpful, real practices that we can do every day. And in fact, she has these micro practices that I would highly recommend. Anyway, you're going to love this conversation. We talk all things trauma from, quote unquote, little t trauma to quote unquote, big T trauma, and what that means and how we can look at trauma in a different way and how we collectively went through the trauma of the pandemic in our own unique ways and how we're still kind of there and what we can do to move through this collective trauma and how we can live really happy and interesting and really fulfilling lives. So settle in, listen in, and you will be, I think, amazed and want to know a lot more about Dr. Jenny King. Well, hey everyone, this is Melissa with the Fully Mindful, and I am here with Dr. Jennifer King, Jenny King, as she's known on her socials, and so glad that you're here. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Yeah, and I have so many things that I want to talk to you about. I'm going to fangirl a little bit on you, which is
geez.
And I'll explain to the listeners, I've been following Dr. Jenny for a while, and she does all this amazing work with trauma and somatics and all the things that I personally love and that resonate with me. And what I love, I think, mostly about your work, I mean, I love all the things, but one of the things that I really appreciate is you're just real about it. There's no it's just, I think you posted something the other day, and I'm struggling to remember it exactly the way that you put it, but it was basically I'm paraphrasing, you didn't say this, but don't let somebody tell you how you're supposed to feel, when you're beyond a certain thing or when you're not beyond, or what this means for you, but it is for you the way that it is for you, right?
Yes. Our experiences are, uniquely our own.
Yeah. And I mean, and let's talk, I guess, let's maybe get on the same page so people understand what you do in your work. But most of us, when we hear the word trauma, I think we think what we're going to call big T trauma, the things that happen to people that are unquestionably traumatic, a car accident, a death, abuse, neglect, something like that. And then there's what I guess some people call little T trauma. I'm not sure why, but
Yeah, I don't love that, but it is very popular. And I do understand the appeal of categorizing. That makes sense to me. But yeah, the little t, big T, little t feels a little tricky to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, how would you talk about what people say is little t trauma? Like, how is that different or the same as big T trauma?
I don't think that this is the intention. I would hope that this is not that this is not the intention, but I think that the way that those terms sometimes get used, it can feel a little bit dismissive to the situations or experiences or events that a person may have experienced in a way that to them is traumatic, but does not fit into those categories like the ones that you mentioned. And I think what's really interesting about it is that it's not as if our bodies can tell the difference between the big T's and the little T's necessarily. And so putting them in categories, I understand, Lenore Terr talks about type 1 traumas and type 2 traumas, and type 2s tend to be more chronic, repetitive types of exposures that end up potentially leading to like a complex PTSD versus singular events leading to traditional PTSD. But I think that just the word trauma itself it's really complicated, especially right now, because we use that word sometimes to describe both a thing that has happened and a reaction to the thing that has happened. The way that I like to think about it, SAMHSA has these 3 E's that they use to help folks try to come up with a definition of trauma. The E's are events, experiences, and effects. So something has to happen, an event, a series of events, a set of circumstances that is experienced as overwhelming, threatening, harmful, you're feeling powerless, all of those things, and has both short and long-term effects. I like that. It's big, it's flexible, it's adaptive, and it's very much about the person who had the experience defining it for themselves. The somatic folks, on the other hand, I've seen a lot of definitions that are, and this is a paraphrase too, because I can't remember exactly what it is, but something about anything that is too much, too fast, too soon to be integrated, which is also big and open and flexible. But I think that both of those definitions are useful in us being able to own our own stories. But I also think it's kind of a buzzy term right now that can get a little hazy.
Well, and then if you have teenagers at all, sometimes you'll hear things, and maybe not just with the teenagers, but I happen to have one like, I was so traumatized by that, and so we use this language, whether we're teenagers or adults, to indicate, something, we had a big feeling about something, but it's not necessarily trauma, right? And it's not to diminish that big feeling that we had, but it is maybe not exactly trauma because maybe it doesn't behave the same way in the body as it does if it were what like you and I might be calling like actual trauma, whether that's type 1, type 2, little t, big T, however we're defining it. Trauma is trauma to the body. And I think that's what you said is like the nervous system, as I understand it, is still experiencing it in this way. And that's unique to the person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's unique to their development, their childhood, their parents' development and their experiences. It's definitely not one size fits all. The other word, actually, when you were talking about your teenager, for a second, I thought you were going to say that they use the word triggered, which is another one.
Oh, that one too, yes.
That gets tossed around a whole lot. So I will offer, I was trained by Dr. Bruce Perry, who created the neurosequential model of therapeutics. And within that model, he uses the term evocative cue, which I am now, I have adopted, and I'm trying to spread the word. So when we, whether we're working in a clinical capacity, we're doing coaching, when folks are really coming up against these environmental cues, something going on that really is reminiscent to them in some way of a traumatic experience, it cannot feel good sometimes to use the word trigger because it's been so sort of watered down like that. So
Right. I think, that word for sure, trauma is certainly edging there if it's not already there as a watered down word. And we don't want to diminish these experiences because they are really,
exactly.
really, really strong. And, to the point that I guess I wanted to make too is that it is unique to each person. In other words, you might have somebody you might have people who were in the same vehicle crash, and one person's experience of it and what they feel afterward could be really different than the other person's, for all the reasons that you said. What happened in their childhood, what's happening in their current life, all those things. We have this very binary approach in our culture of like, this is the thing that happened, and therefore, this is the impact. I was recently listening to Dr. Galber Mate's book, The Myth of Normal. And he talks about that. Like, we have this tendency to oversimplify, like even in your world, your professional clinical world, and in research, people will oversimplify. And I don't know, it's not malicious. It's just what we do to try to make sense of things, right? So it's really important not to oversimplify what trauma is and what that impact is for people.
And I think we see that, at least I know that I see it a lot on social media. There's not room for nuance, really, when you're creating a 60-second video or a few slides in a post. And I think I don't know in terms of the research, but it feels to me like people more and more are turning to social media to better understand their experiences, to find practices and models and coaches and groups and all of these different resources. And there's a lot about that that's really great. But yeah, it's hard. It can be hard to, as someone who creates content, it can be hard to, do a topic justice. And I think for folks who are learning that way or unlearning in that way, it can just be hard to sift through, what's real, solid, useful information to me that is also backed up by something, a theory or some research or something.
Yeah, for right now, in some ways, I think that's why I'm attracted a bit to TikTok, because there are some longer formats that are available. They're still not terribly long, right? You're not taking an hour-long class or workshop or something, but you can get a 10-minute or so reel on I don't know if they call it reels in TikTok, but whatever they call it, you can actually get into something a little bit more than you could necessarily on Instagram or maybe someplace else. Same thing with LinkedIn, although I don't think that's certainly as widely used. Definitely not with younger people. But yeah, and I think that is that is tricky when you're a content creator that is dedicated to remaining based in science, like you are, of like, well, how do I create meaningful content that is going to be helpful to somebody, that doesn't maybe oversimplify the issue or make it seem like, this is something very simple that you can just read a post and now you're good.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey everybody, this is Melissa with The Fully Mindful. It's the new year, and I bet you're feeling the need to unlock your full potential and embrace empowerment, or maybe something completely different. Well, I'm excited to offer a new program with one-on-one breathwork and coaching sessions. We'll embark on a truly transformative journey of self-discovery, combining conscious, connected breathwork and embodiment coaching and more. So contact me, Melissa, at The Fully Mindful, for your transformative session today.
Yes. And I didn't know that I could do that. I did not set out to be a person that was creating content and creating these resources. It started during COVID for me. So many of the folks around me and myself included, the ways that we had been accustomed to coping, all of a sudden a lot of them weren't available anymore. right? We couldn't get to the gym. We couldn't, go to a yoga class, whatever the case may be. And so we had to start getting a little bit more creative. And I think about the early days of the pandemic, like the lockdown phase of the pandemic. And I just found myself having the same conversation over and over again, where folks are saying like, I'm okay. I can do my work from home, or maybe kids are learning from home and there's complexities to that, but we're healthy and we can get outside and all of these things appear okay, but I'm exhausted and I'm so irritable and my brain is like not functional. My executive functioning is so weak. I'm foggy all the time. And it helped me to realize that there are ways that I understand the impact of stress on the brain and the body that help to sort of explain that. So I wrote some pieces and put them up on Medium, and they kind of took off in a way that I had not anticipated. And then as I'm talking about these different practices and these ideas about these sort of bite-sized ways of supporting the nervous system versus going to the gym or going to a yoga class, there was a real appetite for that because we had to get creative and we had to try some new things. So it really was like a happy accident. It just all kind of unfolded in that way.
Well, and a happy accident for many people, right? Because we have benefited from your work that's out there. I want to, and we'll go back and talk about these bite-sized things in a moment, but you reminded me that one of the things that I definitely want to cover is this idea that we are done with the pandemic. And I've just had many conversations with people in the last several months even, and we're not done, are we? And I don't mean the virus and like lockdown and all that, like fingers crossed, like we are mostly done with that, right? It's this malaise, agitation, anxiety, all of these things that I know I myself have experienced. And lots of people seem to have experienced. Is that what you're finding in your work too?
Absolutely. The folks that I engage with, our students. So I am an assistant professor in our social work program at Case Western. And I remember just even the past 2 years, just the level of stress, especially once we got back into the classroom. You could walk into the classroom and just kind of feel the activation that was there. And I of course, none of us are okay still, because everything that we kind of absorbed, everything that we took on and took in over the past 3 years, it's all still there. There's not been time or space individually, collectively, certainly, to sort of pause, stop down, and process or move any of that through us. I think about it as like metabolizing all of what had been sort of stored up. Because when we think about stress in the body, the pattern of stress related to the pandemic is like the most damaging kind, because stress itself isn't bad, but being able to try something new is a stressful event. You feel the little butterflies or your palms sweating, but then you do the new thing and you kind of come back down to baseline. And with the pandemic and other experiences that are unpredictable, that are long-term, where the sort of dose of stress is way too big, we don't ever get to come back down to baseline. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about. Not only have we not really had a chance to come back down to baseline, it's also totally possible, and in my mind, realistic, that for many of us, our baselines have shifted because we've been in this heightened state for so long that the stress response system can become sort of sensitized. I think about it like I'm a white body person, like a sunburn, where a teeny tiny touch or a bruise, it doesn't take much to kind of put folks over the edge right now. And sometimes that's a function of, if you were a person who your sort of default state was pretty calm, pretty chilled out, It may not be like that anymore. You may have some reactivity or some hypervigilance that you didn't have before. And so it just doesn't take as much for us to kind of fly off the handle.
Yeah. And I think, something that I've been thinking about too, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is this, nobody's really talking about it, or not very many people. So it's almost like, oh, we're done with the pandemic. I'm going to put like cotton in my ears and la, 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 whistling in the dark. I'm fine. Everything's back to normal. Nothing to see here, folks.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean, or at least in my experience, when you pretend something didn't happen, it doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Yes.
And it can still have, in fact, may even have more profound effects on us because we're not dealing with it. We're not processing it. So it comes out all these crazy sideways ways. Like you said, maybe we're more on edge now, or maybe we're depressed a little bit or anxious, or we just don't know what's wrong with us. I think I used the word malaise earlier, and that's definitely something that I've noticed, this sort of like, and I mean, I was on a walk the other day with my daughter who's just turned 15, and she said, "Mom, do you ever miss the pandemic?" And I was like, "Whoa, what do you mean?" And she's like, "Well, remember, and we just to take walks like this, and like there was just time, and we were together." And, and she said some other things that, are probably private, so I won't say here, but it's like, it just got me thinking of like, yeah, there was, that says something when there's a part of us, and I related with what she was saying. I'm sure she's not the only one. I know she's not. I felt it. I'm sure other people do.
I relate to that too.
Yeah. Like, as traumatic as it was, there was this, we're in it togetherness, and a quietness that we just went back, in terms of yin and yang. We went from the yin to yang all the way, and like making up for lost time. And my husband has also commented, he said, in some ways it was easier, as anxious as we all were. It was easier because we were all doing it together, but now we're all alone again.
Yeah, I think that, and that's a piece of it. I think definitely, and it's also how we generally respond to trauma too, that it's very much thought to be an individual thing, an individual experience, something that happened to you, where there's no broader context for it, right? There's no attention given to the systems and structures and laws and policies that have created conditions where things like can happen. And I think that that's a piece with COVID too, that the not talking about it, for those who are noticing any differences in their mood or in their behavior, you have no choice but to sort of blame yourself. There must be something wrong with me, because everybody else around me looks like they have kind of gone back to the old way, normal, whatever normal is. And I'm just not there. So it must be my fault. I must be doing something wrong, which is really unfortunate. I also think I just recently had a similar sort of conversation about the aspects of quarantine that felt pleasant for my family. And a friend of mine is a nurse, and her experience during that time period was very, very different from mine. The other thing we haven't really talked about is that the points of experiencing that stress were really different for different people. So where I didn't feel it as succinctly when we were locked down, I certainly did feel it upon reentry. Like that phase of things felt scary and overwhelming and confusing and kind of all of these different things. So it's not just about those first 60 days or 90 days. There were all of these kind of peaks and valleys over the past few years, along with all of these other things happening around, in our country and around the world. Like it's everybody had a collective experience that was unique to them, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. Yeah. A collective experience that is unique to them. Yeah, that totally makes sense, because we did. I mean, I have friends who were on the front lines, medical professionals, friends who are teachers, who had to go back. And just very different experiences. And like you said, very different at different points too. And, like for me, my husband who's in hospitality, we have a restaurant and a coffee shop, and the anxiety around that and closures and then no, you're open, then no, you're closed. And oh my gosh, is he going to get sick? And like, and everybody had their own unique experience. Maybe they had someone who died or was very ill, they couldn't see. And so, like you said, collective experience that we experienced individually. What's interesting to me is, this idea that we're not really collectively dealing with it right now. And I don't know how we move beyond that. Like, how do we, is there a way that we can collectively acknowledge this and do the work? Yes, we all have to do it individually, but there is power in the collective, and doing something so that we aren't comparing our insides with other people's outsides, which is what I think you were saying. Like, well, there's something wrong or bad with me because everybody else seems normal. And when in fact, probably everybody else is having the exact same experience or thought, like, oh, everybody else has got their act together. How about, why not me? So what are your thoughts? Like, what are some things that we can do either as this kind of a big question? So, and by the way, to the listeners, I don't give my questions ahead of time. So Dr. Jenny thought about this. So I'm just like dropping this bomb. So how do we fix this problem, this collective trauma that we've been through? What do we do? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. And I think a big piece of it in my mind is around grief and mourning. Whether that's, again, the losses were all very different, but loss was a shared experience too, I think, for different folks in different ways for different folks. And that's not something that collectively in this country and in our culture, we're super comfortable with. We don't like to talk about loss. We don't really know what to do with it. We don't know how to support people when they're experiencing it. So I think we could learn a lot from cultures and communities that have rituals, for example, around grief or around mourning, where it really is about coming together, maybe sharing testimony about, well, I'm thinking specifically about a death, but about the thing that happened or the person that someone has lost. And, none of that has happened at all. Even when you think about all of the people who died from COVID, we're not saying their names. There's not, we're just not, we're not doing any of it justice. And so I'm curious about sort of the different levels at which we could do some of the grieving and mourning together, whether that's starting in our families, broadening out into schools and neighborhoods, communities, starting just to have a conversation about what it was like and what changed for you and what still feels different. I think I was just having a conversation with a friend yesterday about this theme of like feeling abandoned coming up, that a lot of people, I think, especially folks who were on the front lines, folks in hospitality, felt abandoned by systems that you thought maybe were going to protect you. And so that's a loss. That's a major loss. So I come back to thinking about moving through grief, living alongside grief, because really, that's probably more accurately what that looks like. But your point about there not being even the opportunity to name this as a thing, that's a piece that's really tricky too. So how can we develop language? How can we develop some practices ourselves and within our spheres of influence to just allow folks to speak their truth and feel kind of held in that, to kind of, just come back to a place that feels a little more whole.
The Fully Mindful podcast explores what it is to be fully mindful and present in our everyday lives, uncover our worth, and discover our purposes. I'm Melissa Chareau, the host of The Fully Mindful. I'm a neurodivergent lawyer, mindfulness teacher, and embodiment and breathwork coach. On The Fully Mindful, I interview inspiring creatives, wellness leaders, and social disruptors about how they have discovered their purpose or purposes and live a mindful and connected life. Every other episode, I also offer mindfulness and somatic practices that work for everyday people doing everyday things so that we can thrive and be present for the people and causes we care the most about. Find me at The Fully Mindful on all the places that you listen to your podcasts. Yeah, I was just thinking in some ways we did this a lot better with 9/11. We really did. There were like a televised ceremony. We named the names. We talk about it. We talk about it every year since then. We don't forget. And I think in some ways we've done much better with that and with that grief than we have with this. This to me feels like we got so freaking scared of what happened because of it was global. And it's like all the horrible movies that we see, right? And we got so scared that we've just put our heads in the sand of like, I just want to pretend it didn't happen, because the thought that it could happen again is so overwhelming that I'm willing to just not look at it at all.
Right. Because that's the easier thing to do. It's the easiest thing to do is to look away. And it's unfortunate. Even just thinking about the annual commemoration of 9/11, and we don't have anything like that. And also because, that was a different type of traumatic experience that had a clear beginning and a clear ending, which we don't have here either. But I think, societally, I would love for us to just be able to get a little more comfortable or a little closer to not looking away in all of these different sort of scenarios. I was just reading Judith Herman's new book, Truth and Repair, I think it's called. And she talks a lot about like the role of the bystander in situations where bad things happen, and that person's role is actually pretty significant. And you have choices about the degree to which you engage that are also weighed against the benefits of not engaging. But not engaging kind of makes you complicit in the thing that's happening. So it just brought that piece up to me, that we have to look at it, and we have to see it, and we have to talk about it rather than burying our heads in the sand.
Yeah, and that's true whether that's the pandemic or, police brutality or, other transphobic actions or whatever is happening in the moment, or continues to happen. Like we can't. It can be quote unquote easy to look away, and I say quote unquote because I think maybe in the moment it feels easier, but in the long run it's not, because this stuff affects all of us, right? It affects and then it affects how we feel about ourselves by looking away.
Absolutely.
How do we process the fact that we looked away when something was happening?
And if you're anything like me, you ruminate on it for a very long time. All of the things that, you should have said or you should have done. And there's, I think this too, a lot of what we're talking about, it all comes back to the body, because when I think about nervous system support and supporting the mind-body connection, and I talk about this on social media a lot, I'm not talking about helping folks get into a state of calm. That's not the goal of nervous system support. We want to be able to react, right? And that's an example of not being able to kind of notice and sit with the discomfort that I'm sure we're feeling when something's happening and we're witnessing it, and being able to kind of stay in that long enough to choose to engage in a different way. I think there's, we put a lot of emphasis on sort of like down regulation and calming folks down. And I don't think, if if we want anything to start to look different within our communities, within our systems, like that can't be what we are aiming for. We have to be as kind of adaptive and flexible and stable as we can in the ways that we are reacting. And I think that's a whiteness thing too. I think there's this, I'm reading, actually I have this book right by me. We're doing a book club on this white women, everything you know about racism and how to do better. It's really great and paints this beautiful, clear line between perfectionism, niceness in white women, and the way that that upholds white supremacy. And so sometimes if it's, let's say, speaking up, for example, like if you are seeing something happen on the subway, for example, within kind of white woman culture, it could be thought of as rude to speak up, right? Because we're meant to kind of uphold this calm, peaceful niceness. That really it's toxic to us too. It's toxic to everybody.
Well, and wasn't that, I mean, this is maybe a tangent, but one of the problems for Hillary Clinton when she was running, right? I can't tell you how many people I've spoken with who said, well, I just didn't care for her. And they can't, they can't put their finger on what it is. I have a sense of what it probably is. And it's probably because she was willing to talk about things that are uncomfortable for some people to hear. And she had a position on things. And I think that's why women in politics have difficulty. They either end up acting like, sort of the quintessential male figure rather than just as themselves, because that's they don't know how else to act. They don't have any models for how to act and be. But at the same time, there's that double-edged sword of, if I act like that, then, you might not care for me because I'm rude, or I'm speaking out of turn, or I'm being shrill, or the classic, this goes back centuries of, the hysterical woman. And that's fascinating. I'm going to read that book.
It's really good.
How that ends up actually supporting white supremacy by the failure to speak up. And, just kind of getting back to what you were saying is like, it's not about just being calm, although for sure there's a time and a place for downregulation.
Yes.
But we have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic for a reason. Sometimes it's absolutely appropriate to be activated and angry and speak out, or run or hide, or whatever is the impulse in the moment might be completely appropriate for the situation. And then there are times when it's more, it makes more sense to be downregulated and calm and rest and digest, so to speak. And so it's really getting healthy enough in our nervous system so that we know we at least have maybe some more agency, or at least more awareness of where we're at in any given moment. And I do think, especially I'm in the mindfulness world and breathwork world and somatics world. And there does a lot, not so much in somatics that I found, but definitely in the mindfulness world, this idea that you aspire to be, this calm beacon of no feeling, no thoughts, no anything. And I mean, the people who are truly experts in mindfulness will disagree with, that's not what they're aiming for. But that seems to be this, collective idea, misinformed as it is, that somehow the goal of mindfulness or Buddhism or any of these either philosophies or practices is to come to some form of nothingness.
Yeah. Yes. And I follow a lot of those people on social media. And so that's sort of like beatific grin, and everything around them is beige. And it's, their tone is very sort of soft. And I think even that, if that is a standard that you're kind of holding yourself up to or comparing yourself against, that can also not feel very good. right? Because I am a person that has anxiety and depression. I am a person that gets irritated easily. And anger too, and thinking specifically about women and more specifically about white women. I think we are kind of trained very early to like avoid becoming activated in that way. So yeah, to avoid our activation. We're not quite sure what to do with it when it comes up, other than to sort of try to figure out how to very quickly squash it. When in reality, that's, there's wisdom in activation, and in anger, there's important kind of intuitive messaging there that we end up missing when we're so quick to kind of, okay, let me take a deep breath, or let me, count to 10, or whatever the case may be. Certainly, those strategies are super important and can be super helpful. But I would say there's also room to kind of just stay there for a second or a little bit longer and see if maybe there's something else that's coming up that's actually really important.
Well, and I think that's so important. I had something happen the other night where, I don't know, I mean, this is probably not unusual, but I was scrolling while watching television, while like internet shopping, while, I don't know, eating something, right? So I was doing all those things, and I was like, oh, I just finally had this awareness. Oh, I wonder what's going on here. And that, and I noticed a feeling which I identified that I didn't really want to feel. And it was like, instead of just like, oh, I need to change that feeling, it's like, let's get a little curious about that. Like, what is this trying to tell me? This is information that might be useful. And so I know we don't like to feel uncomfortable in this country, and Western cultures in general. I have no idea if that's universal, but I know we have it here.
We sure do.
Yeah, we don't like to feel it, but sometimes that information, like you said, is really useful. Maybe it gives us deeper insight. Maybe it gives us a direction to go in. And so sometimes it's really important to sit in that discomfort. Not forever. We don't have to wallow in it, right?
No.
Yeah, get curious about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, we talked a little bit, you hinted at these little bite-sized things that people can do. And I know that goes into your work about somatics. And I know that you've also studied, I think, with trauma and the breath. So if you could talk a little bit, I guess, about all of that, about, breath and somatics and different things that people can access on a daily basis that will help them to become more imbalanced, not imbalanced, but in balance.
Yes, got it. More balance.
More balance.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Yeah, so I have done lots of different types of training, as you have as well, and I have been feeling more kind of called and pulled toward this mind body, which is also like, that doesn't make any sense, right? That's the language that we use, but like the mind body connection, that doesn't make any sense. But I was doing therapy for a long time, 100% of that being talk therapy. I mean, working with children, not so much. There's a lot of play. There's a lot more movement that kind of happens in those spaces. But it just felt like they could be very effective for some people, and for others, there was kind of only so far that they could go. And in coming to learn about somatics and learn about kind of how our experiences are sort of stored in the body, like at the tissue level, even, that just started to make a lot of sense to me. That even thinking about my own experiences, thinking about the ways that I hold my body, or kind of my instinctively how I move when certain things happen, or how I was a big bracer for a long time, like I think I walked around like with my abs fully tightened for probably a decade. They didn't look that way, but that's definitely what was happening. Yeah. So, and just figuring out ways to kind of really use movement, because one of the reasons that I wanted to study the traumatic stress and the breath was very personal. So because of experiences that I've had, I always struggled with breath practices that were prescriptive and quite long. So for example, a lot of folks find 4-7-8 breathing to be so soothing that, can put people right to sleep. I find that practice to be incredibly activating, right? So again, I'm like, there must be something wrong with me because everybody loves deep breath, right? And I wanted to learn what that was about. And so just having a sense of how the breath plays into things and the body plays into things and how all of this kind of comes together. What I really wanted to do and continue to want to do is to help folks first understand some of that, understand some of those connections, feel validated in the experiences that they have and the reactions that they have, in their bodies, in their minds. And then really be able to pull from like a very comprehensive toolbox of strategies. Because one thing that I always come back to is this strategy a match for my current state? So for example, this morning, I woke up today just feeling very, very anxious, just totally physically. And I couldn't place, nothing's going on. I wasn't anxious about this. I didn't know what it was about. But I needed to move. And that came instinctively right away. So I went for a jog. I felt a little better. Then something happened, but kind of anxiety spiked again. And before we talked, I did do a little, sitting breath work for a few minutes. What's going to kind of work to get us back into balance is going to be different depending on our internal state. So, which is all of this is things that but one kind of metaphor or analogy that I really love that also comes from Dr. Perry's work is he describes the nervous system's attempts at balance like a furnace, right? Where it's sort of monitoring what's going on in the environment and will either heat up or cool down in response to that. And so when I think about these micro practices, these quick and easy practices, I don't ever want to be prescriptive about what they're meant to do, because your furnace and my furnace are very different. And so the 4-7-8 breathing, for example, could help to cool you down, while for me, well, actually for you too, the 4-7-8 breathing is what's going to kind of heat us up. So ideally, we are able to offer folks the space to explore these different practices and figure out what's going to work when, and just make sure you have a whole lot to pull from.
Yeah, I love that idea or that metaphor of the furnace, because not only is each person's, temperature, internal temperature different, but what's going on in their lives externally.
Exactly.
Just, is it 900 degrees outside? And so like the AC is really going to crank, or, it's really cold outside, so the heat has to crank, or somewhere in between. And I love that. And so it's not prescriptive just in the sense of like, this is going to work for everyone, but this might not even work for you today in this moment. You might need this other tool. And so, like you said, having like a number of tools at somebody's disposal to be like, yeah, this is what I need today. This is what's working today. This isn't, or this, oh, this one is better, because, it may not be what works for us today.
And it's really easy if you try one of those practices and it doesn't work that day to be like, well, that doesn't work for me. That's off the, cross that one off the list. It may work for you just under different circumstances.
Yeah. Or like you said, you end up internalizing, some idea of ourselves like, oh, well, that didn't work for me. And so there must be something, I must be doing something wrong, or there's something wrong with me, because it's not working. And, I sometimes, I'm in 12-step, I'm very open about that. And sometimes I hear this a little bit in 12-step where it'll be like, well, just say the serenity prayer, or, like some magical thing is going to happen. And sometimes it does, right? Sometimes,
right.
Sometimes that is exactly the tool that is needed. And fortunately, 12-step is fairly open. So it's not always, I'm not trying to say it's prescriptive, but there are people within it who sometimes will be overly prescriptive, just as there are in mindfulness practices. Well, just do the 4-7-8 breathing, or just do this meditation. And I mean, there are some people who, meditation causes extreme anxiety for on certain days. And so, to try to say like, you have to sit on this particular cushion and focus on your breath when that actually may cause a whole lot of anxiety. I mean, maybe you could get curious about that anxiety, but also maybe the practice for you today is going on a walk or going on a run or cooking or gardening or, doing something else, uh, giving yourself a hug, putting a hand on your heart, whatever the practice may be for you in that moment. And I love that. And you have these, I have them right here, these little micro practice cards. And I love that. It's like, these just different practices that we can remember. We don't always remember when we're stressed out what to do. It's so great to have like, oh, right. And I'm just going to pull one out. Right. Okay. I can try this one. Or, if that one doesn't work, I can try another one or shit, I'll go through the whole deck.
It's one of those days. It's a whole deck day.
I've had whole deck days lately because you were talking about going for a run, and I suddenly got so I was happy for you and also envious because I had a hip injury for a couple of weeks and I haven't had the ability to go do the really physical activities that my body likes to do. And so I've had to sort of sit in discomfort a little bit more, or find other tools, that that they're not my normal go-to,
Right.
My go-to really would have been go on a run. Well, that's not available. So,
well, and to be clear, I mean, I'm really stretching the meaning of the word run with what I did.
Oh, I understand.
Some jogging, some walking, some singing, whatever. But yeah, I totally, that really resonates with me because I think that was the reason that I started feeling called to learn more about movement-based practices, because stillness works sometimes and breath work works sometimes, and other times it doesn't. And I need to be more physical. That's how, when I think about metabolizing what I've been taking in, that's usually what my body wants to do. It's let's sweat it out or tense and release. I really like interval work. There are a few different kind of interval-based practices in the card deck, because I think what my body is craving is the ability to complete a stress cycle, right? So to kind of get to that peak where my heart is really pumping, or, whatever the case may be. It's not usually heart pumping with these practices, but with working out it is. And then come back down to baseline. And it's like my nervous system recognizes that, that's great. We, we can come back down. We can do hard things, or, whatever mantra is hot right now. We can kind of get back into a place after feeling a lot of activation.
Well, and it's true. We do need to complete the stress cycle, right? We don't do that a whole lot in this society. We're just told to just pick yourselves up by the bootstraps and just keep marching on, and just soldier on, and, don't cry, don't yell, don't celebrate, don't whatever. Right. And those are things that complete the stress cycle that we used to do more collectively as, as a society, was to complete those stress cycles together, or have, like you said, you're talking about grief and processing, something that we can do collectively together in a supportive environment. And so, I mean, do you have anything that you recommend that people can do sort of collectively to complete the stress cycle? I spot there.
No, that's okay. Part of it comes back to, for me, people's comfortability with some of that more expressive stuff. Playfulness, engaging in play, whatever play might mean for you, because play has to be pleasurable. So, I always joke, a few years ago, those adult coloring books were really big. I get so anxious just looking at a blank page like that, because I have no idea, where to start. So coloring for me is not going to be a thing that's playful, but things like dancing, going to a concert, singing together. And I think there are communities where that happens. And to be clear too, I mean, a lot of these practices, a lot of these somatic practices, a lot of the movement-based practices, and definitely a lot of the sort of rituals that we're describing are rooted in indigenous practices. And so when we look at indigenous culture, there's a lot of humming together, of swaying and moving together. I try to do those practices when I am facilitating groups. When I'm teaching, we'll often start with a sort of collective movement practice, even if we're on Zoom. Just finding ways to be playful, to be expressive, and to move in ways that your body might want to move, but just kind of hasn't felt accessible since you were a kid, right? My kids are really little, and they are the best reminders for me that our bodies intuitively, inherently know how to get regulated, whether that's spinning or, being upside down or, whistling or, they just do it. We just kind of lose that as we get older. So I'm always encouraging folks to think about just hold on to the idea of playfulness and where you can kind of tap into things that maybe brought joy at some point, but you've moved away from as you've gotten older.
I love that. Although I will confess here, I know we're getting close to the end of our time together, but I will confess that I have had, up until more recently, a very difficult time with even the word play. It made me like cringe, and I had lots of difficulty with it. And I think, I've come to figure out that it's because, I grew up with untreated ADD. And so I behaved very differently from my peers. And so often the way my play looked was maybe different. And so I had learned to mask it, right? So I had to get through that of like, I don't have to mask who I am. And so I was able to reframe. So to anyone this might be helpful for, reframing play as experimentation. And somehow like that little mind ninja trick worked for me. Instead of calling it play, call it like experiment. It's just an experiment. It sounds serious. It's like scientific experiment.
Yeah.
But that it's essentially the same thing.
It is the same thing.
Oh, I wonder what that feels like to sway a little bit, or to try like some qigong, or maybe shake my body a little bit, or to act weird. Like, what might that feel like in my body? So like, the idea of experimentation, but for other people, the idea of play is really helpful.
But I completely understand that. And I think the idea of play as an adult also feels really daunting. I have no idea, what's going to feel good to me. I actually, I don't remember when I wrote it. I wrote on Medium a piece about finding your play personality for adults, which breaks it down in a way that it might give you some ideas of where to start, kind of based on some of your interests, the ways that you engage with other people. Are you a leader? That kind of stuff. So yeah, if anyone's listening and now you want to experiment with play, check out that article.
I will try to find that and put it in the show notes because I think it's so important. I was just thinking as we kind of wind down, I don't know if you watch television, but I watched the show Ted Lasso. And, they show a lot of really beautiful moments and some kindnesses. And I mean, I'm shocked at how well this show is written in terms of being emotionally intelligent and exercising compassion towards others, and not being a good bystander, and, exercising self-compassion and all of this. But one of the things that strikes me every time I watch the show, where they have like a scene where they're all in the soccer stands or whatever. And this last one that I watched, they were all singing. And I was like, that's it. That's why we do this stuff, right? Here's this collective, they're all there for the same reason, even if they're on other sides from each other. There's this connection. And then they're singing together, which is like this beautiful way to connect again. And it's like, oh, that's what we're talking about. And we don't have to like necessarily go climb a jungle gym, although by all means do, but it could look like that.
Yeah, it absolutely could look like that. That is a really good show. also for all the reasons that you named it as really good. But I'm behind, so I haven't seen the singing episode. Now I'm very much looking forward to it.
Oh, you will like it. The other show that I really like is Shrinking. Which
Yes, I loved Shrinking.
so good.
Yeah.
You've already, I was going to ask you, what are you reading? But you've talked about the book that you're reading. Name it again
I
for me.
am. It's called Everything You Already Know About Your Own Racism and How to Do Better. And it's by Regina Jackson and Saira Rao. Another one, I'm like, what books do I have around here? Another book I really love is called Raising Free People. It's by Akila Richards. So this is about unschooling, which is a practice that my family engages in, but it's definitely related to raising children, but it's also very much about helping yourself to get a little bit more free. So that's one that I recommend to you. I read all the time. I love Samantha Irby's books are hilarious. And so it's not always heavy. I love crappy fiction, like beach reads. I love really funny nonfiction. But those are the more serious ones that I'm working with right now.
I love that you add in there that you also like, silly fiction and that kind of thing, because
and I love reality TV. That's another thing. I know all about what's happening on Vanderpump Rules. Like, I have no shame. I don't even call them guilty pleasures. They're just pleasures.
They're just pleasures. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is we're just humans and we like all sorts of things. And so I love that. And I love that about you, that you're just open and open-hearted, and like, you're not like, oh, I'm this, professor and this doctor and I've appeared in all these places. You're like, you are all of those things. And
not normal, just a person. I'm not normal, just a person.
Just a person, normal, whatever that means. Yeah. Just a regular human among humans. Yes. Well, thank you so much for being willing to have this conversation with us today, with me, and that the listeners will hopefully enjoy as much as I have. I know I really have. And I will put all the things on the show notes about how to get in touch with you. But you are at probably the best way, in case people don't look at the show notes, although do. But in case they don't, tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, so probably easiest is across social media. I am at Dr. Jenny King. Instagram is probably where I'm most active, but I have Twitter and I'm learning TikTok, but I'm not there yet.
Oh, you're going to be so good at TikTok. I just know it. You're going to be.
I don't want to do any like dances or.
You don't have to. Yeah. You don't have to point at things or.
I don't want to point at things. Right.
You don't have to do anything. You can just show up and just be you, and you'll be magnificent. So I'm looking forward to that.
Okay.
And I hope we get to talk again soon. And I didn't even get a chance to talk to you more about the other work that you're doing. And anyway, we will have there will be a part 2 if you're open.
Yes. Let's do it. This is so fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hey, everybody, if you like this conversation, make sure to rate the show in Apple or Spotify or wherever you are listening so that others can find it and enjoy it too. And if you like the show and want to keep hearing great conversations with really interesting people about how they found their purpose, please donate to the show. Go to thefullymindful.com to donate today. Hey, everybody, it's Melissa, and I'm wondering if you all can relate. Have you ever caught yourself procrastinating or maybe doubting your abilities, or maybe you have a black belt inner critic like I do or have had that wants to sabotage your every move with judgment and perfectionism expectations? It might keep you stuck, it might keep you anxious and away from your full potential. The Positive Intelligence Program, PQ, is a powerful 6-week journey designed to help you quiet those saboteurs, embrace positivity, and find flow in your life. Through daily practices and weekly focuses, we'll work together to build your mental fitness. The PQ app will guide you every step of the way and support you, and you'll be supported either by myself in a one-on-one or in a small group of like-minded individuals where you can share insights and progress. So reach out, contact me at info@thefullymindful.com to find out how we can work together one-on-one or in a small group today.